want to welcome back to the garden our very dear friend Phil Gulley, who's going to talk to us this morning about the theme, So Must We Think Anew. Phil?
Oh my gosh, all that beautiful music. We're having Music Sunday back in our meeting house this morning in my absence, but I don't think it's going to sound like that. I don't know, Quakers and music, it's kind of dicey sometimes. And then all this technology, which I'm just not accustomed to. We have a neighbor who called me up not long ago. He was all excited. He said, "You've got to come over to our house and see what we've got." And so my wife and I walked over there, and it turned out they had bought a 3D television set, which was very complex technology, requiring several remote controls. None of us could figure it out, but thankfully they had a 4-year-old son who helped us. But if you've ever seen a 3D movie or watched a 3D television, you know it's really, really fascinating. It reminded me of when I was a kid and growing up there in Danville, and I'd go to the public library and look at pictures through a stereoscope. Now, I know I'm revealing something about my age there, but some of you who are my age or older might remember those. They're a little wooden thing with a tin hood that fit around, and there was a picture that you would put in, the same images side by side, differing slightly in perspective and angle, so that a two-dimensional picture appeared three-dimensionally. Since they were most popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s, most of the pictures that could be viewed through a stereoscope were from that era. And whenever I would be at the library, there would always be an elderly person or two who had grown up in the time the pictures were taken. And they were pictures mostly of our town back then. And they would reminisce aloud about the perfect old days, how wonderful everything was, which of course were only perfect in their memories. And then moving pictures were invented and stereoscope companies went out of business. The new replaced the old. That unchanging principle in life, the new replaces the old, which I thought was wonderful when I was young, but now I'm not so sure I like it, but it's just the way it is. The new replaces the old. It is an inviolate rule. No matter how much we resist it, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us, the new replaces the old. A month before he signed the Emancipation Proclamation, Abraham Lincoln sent a letter to Congress in which he wrote, "The dogma," now I'm putting this in perspective with Trump's tweets, okay? And so here we have Lincoln. "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. It is, we know, sometimes difficult to know when we can rely upon the dogmas of our quiet past and when the time has come to think anew. This is especially true in religion, when our fondness for life in the past compromises our ability to live in the future. We resist new light. We resist fresh insights. Early Quakers, when we suspected another Quaker was running too far ahead of the rest of us, we would say to that Quaker, "You are running ahead of the light. You have gone beyond your light. You've ran ahead of your guide." It was intended to give one pause, to check the impulse of moving beyond the majority's sense of divine leading. Now, I dabble in Quaker history, and so I've been studying this. And here's the interesting thing I've found, that in nearly every instance, someone was told they had gone beyond their light or ran ahead of their guide or gone ahead of God. In nearly every instance, time and history proved that person correct. They had not gone beyond their light. The majority had lagged behind their guide. They should not have said, slow down, to that person. They should have said, hurry up, to themselves. Remember this. Remember this. Every moral, spiritual, ethical, and intellectual advancement was made by someone the rest of us were telling to slow down. Every moral, spiritual, ethical, and intellectual advancement was made by someone the rest of us were telling to slow down. They were thinking anew when we did not want them to think anew, when we were content to stick with the dogmas of our past, even when those dogmas and traditions and customs did harm to people. In April of 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. was imprisoned in Birmingham jail. 8 religious leaders of the city, the largest churches in that city, wrote an open letter to King entitled A Call to Unity, and they published it in the local paper, A Call to Unity, as if unity were a sacred word. Friends, we perpetuate more wrong in the name of unity. We let more evil go unchallenged for the sake of unity than for any other reason. We will permit injustice after injustice to accrue simply to prevent any tension or disagreement from troubling our ranks. So these religious leaders of Birmingham, Alabama, wrote a letter and named it A Call to Unity. In that letter, they scolded King for what they called his untimely demonstration. It was a polite way of telling King that he had gone beyond his light, that he had outrun God's leading. And King responded with a beautiful letter. If you've never read a letter from the Birmingham jail, you must. And in that letter, he wrote these words: frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who had not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see that justice too long delayed is justice denied. The church's problem isn't that we have gone beyond our guide. The problem is that we have lagged too far behind our guide. Think of that for a moment, the preposterous notion that you and I could outrun God. This unthinking commitment to the past and the entrenched mindset it represents has caused more harm than good. It has demanded that men and women of goodwill make a butchery of their conscience. It has silenced prophets. It has kept us stuck in the yesteryear of a fabled goodness, preserving the sepia tones of a long ago morality that excluded so many. The idea that we can outrun God should be recognized for the lie it is, for it implies that we are able to run ahead of the very God who is constantly before us, always ahead of us, beckoning us toward a land and life we have only reluctantly entered. Not once has God ever said, slow down, to someone pioneering the moral landscape, not once. It is only the case when we have finally dared enter the land of justice and freedom and pitched our tent that God has said, "What took you so long?" Remember that when God led the Israelites through the wilderness, He did so with a pillar of fire in front of them, ahead of them. God does not push us from the past. God pulls us from the future, beckons us from the future. When that great Methodist woman in your own tradition, Anna Howard Shaw, was laboring to secure the right for women to vote, do you suppose God ever said to her, "Slow down, Anna, you are running ahead of me"? God pulls us from the future. Now let us be relevant. We cannot let ourselves, our generation, off the hook. Today, you and I are asked to turn a blind eye to injustice when people who fled to the safety and prosperity of our nation, much as my ancestors did and perhaps yours too, when they have come here for the safety and prosperity we might offer, and have lived here peacefully and productively among us for decades, and yet are ripped from their families' arms. Parents separated from children, and children from parents, and returned to countries they scarcely remember. We are asked, you and I, to turn a blind eye to a justice system that imprisons more of its citizens, most of them poor and people of color, than any other nation on earth. We are asked, you and I, to support a tax policy that enrich the wealthy, bankrupt the poor, and shatter our social compact. We are asked, you and I, to make our peace with gun laws that permit the indiscriminate slaughter of school children. We are asked, you and I, to go along and get along when our leaders dismantle democracy. People say, let us be patient. Let's wait. This is America. It will change for the better. It'll get better. Change will eventually come. People say that. I know they do because I have said it. But now I say, why should our generation dismiss our responsibilities, putting upon the younger generation work that is rightfully ours to do? We in the church ought to be leading the charge for freedom. For we have borne witness, many of us firsthand, to the evils that occur when a minority is singled out for discrimination, when the powerful few tyrannize the powerless many. Justice should not have to wait another day. The dogmas of our quiet past are inadequate. It is time in America, well past time, for us to think anew and act anew, lest God say to us what God said to our ancestors, "What took you so long?" I visited the library several weeks ago. I asked the librarian, I said, when I was a kid, I'd come in here and there was a little contraption that I'd look at pictures through. It was made of wood and tin. What was that called? And the librarian said, oh, that was called a stereoscope. We have one in our historic collection. We don't use it anymore. That is as it should be. Some things belong in our historical collection, in our past. Other things belong to our faithful future. We do not run ahead of God. We cannot run ahead of God, for God is the pillar of fire in front of us, not the dusty rut behind.